This is probably one of the least glamorous parts of being an engineer, but if you are good at executing this when others don't, I guarantee you'll have more and more opportunity come your way. What's up, everyone? Markel here, and welcome to my channel. I talk about tech, career, and mindset, and really three pillars that I find really important. And if you're new here, welcome. And I invite you to subscribe and let me know what you think about this video. At the end, if you like it, throw a comment below. I want to talk about something that is really undervalued and requires almost no skill to do, but of course skill will help you stand apart even more if you do this. As an engineer, I'm sure most of us don't like this or do a poor job in executing this, but getting better in this skill has actually been a lifesaver to me time and time again. And what is that skill? Documentation. I know it doesn't sound glamorous, but hear me out. Documentation prevents unnecessary work from being redone, ensures that other people can find your work and repeat what you just did, and if anything, is good safekeeping in case you want it in the future. So yeah, there are some roles that are like documentation heavy, whether it's like a technical writer or maybe an integration engineer whose job is to write the specification or the spec. But I think everyone should improve in their ability to provide quality documentation. The first reason I would say it's super valuable is it's content creation for the next person. You know, when you do a project or if you come into a role and then you're like, okay, where are we at? Where did we leave off? If no one left you any breadcrumbs, they left you nothing to work with, how messed up does that feel? You're trying to piece together all of these disjointed things and you're like, I'm wasting so much time just being brought up to speed when if I just had a document, if I just had something that I can review to say, here's what we've done so far and here's why we've done it. Now you're able to start at step 5 instead of trying to figure out what step you're even at. Think about it as the person creating it. You won't be in your role forever, at least hopefully. And the days of working at Boeing for 35, 40 years and retiring are pretty much behind us. Most companies, retention is pretty low and sits around 1.5 to 2 years. So if you're changing roles every 1.5 to 2 years, that means that every 1.5 to 2 years, you have to learn something new and you're gonna be around a new set of engineers, you're gonna have a new set of problems. It'd be really good to have that foresight and say, well, I'm not always going to be here. If I write down what I do, the next person will be better off and not have to start at square one. So don't be selfish when it comes to not documenting, because honestly, it is a slight inconvenience because it's not necessarily within your workflow, but I guarantee if you do it, the person down the road would really appreciate your contributions. The second reason why you should get better or start documenting is to be able to show your work. If you're an engineer, you already know this. If you do physics or engineering or math, all of those tests typically require you to show your work. And that's often what's being graded. Not necessarily the final answer. Of course, like if you didn't get the right answer at the end, it's probably not good, but showing your work walks you through what the process was. And that TA or that professor who's grading your paper looks and says, ooh, I see the rationale and I see the logic, but this is where your logic broke at this step. That's the relevance of showing your work in school. And how does that work within the work environment? The same way. You're making a bunch of kind of micro decisions that lead to your ultimate conclusion. Maybe you plot the data a certain way. Maybe you decide to format it a certain way. If someone can't look back and understand what you did, it's really hard to be able to confidently say what they should be able to extract from it. I would also say it's important for you too, because if you're collaborating and working with someone else and you say, hey, I did this thing, I created this part in CAD, but you don't have the rationale of why you created it. You don't have the references of why you needed to adhere to certain parameters. It's really hard for them to be able to follow along, especially if it's all in your head. So documenting your process helps people to better understand what you did and reproduce that for themselves should they need to, especially when it comes to testing. So I've done a lot of tests and I've actually shot myself in the foot way too many times where I didn't properly document a test that I ran, and I ended up having to rerun that test. And it was like a one-off test. So it was something like a bench level test that took me like 15, 20 minutes to run because I had all the parts readily available. And I ran the test, I collected a couple of data points, and I was like, yes, good, I'm moving on to the next thing. But what happens is I poorly documented it, meaning in this case, I just labeled it as test.csv, probably the worst name ever for any document. So I have test CSV, and then inside of it, the labels for the data suck as well. So fast forward a few months, and now I need to refer to that data because it was key in making some decision in my design. I don't know where the data is because I forgot that I called it test.csv. And even if I found it, I kind of forgot how I went about testing it. So now I need to redo that test to be able to prove why I made that certain decision from that test. Another compelling reason to get better at documentation is to reduce doing work twice or 3 times or 4 times. It sucks. Trust me. So by documenting your process, you're able to say, here's what I did. And if I need to repeat it, maybe I can delegate that to someone else. But honestly, most of the times, if you have that test and the rationale, you can now use it as what they call surrogate data to say, well, it may not be exactly what we're looking for, but since we fully understand the process, maybe there are things that we can extract from this. Another really good reason to get better in documentation. And the last reason I would say is for your own safekeeping. Documenting isn't necessarily just for the employer to be able to help other employees. Selfishly, you should probably document to be able to recount all of your contributions, all of the things that you've done for yourself in the future, should you need to. When I first started working at Tesla, there was a senior program manager who had about 3 or 4 years already under his belt at Tesla, and something kind of crazy but normal happened. And I was like, man, did you see what happened this week with blah, blah, blah? And he was like, oh yeah, I wrote it down already. And I was like, what do you mean you wrote it down? He's like, I keep a daily log of all major activities and all major accomplishments for my records. And that was the first time I was like, man, it would be really smart to just journal and write down what I did and what I'm doing for my own keepsake. So I started, I think that week or the next week, and every week I would write down my accomplishments, the things that I was working on, the things that I was struggling with in my own kind of personal log or personal journal. And I kept those. So now I have hundreds of logs and hundreds of journal entries of the things that I worked on, the problems that I've solved, how I went about solving those problems that I can refer to and say, here is a 60-page resume of all of the problems and all of the little things that I worked on over the last few years, if I really wanted to. Maybe 60 pages is a hyperbole, but you guys get the point. It's really valuable for me because, yeah, I could use it for a resume, and yeah, I could use it for another application. But the thing with having a journal or a log or just data in general is that it enables you to have the most flexibility down the line. If you collect a whole bunch of data and you don't know what you're going to do with it today, that's okay. But if you know that the data is valuable, that gives you, again, that flexibility to say, you know what, in a year from now, you discover, I'd really like to write a book about everything that I did. And it's like, oh, great, I have an outline, or I have a template, or I have a starting point. Or you say, I did a bunch of really cool experiments, but I didn't collect the data, or I didn't organize and save the data well enough that I can easily just extract it, repurpose it, and use it for something else. And the thing about journaling or getting better in documentation is that you can do this before you get the job. And by doing this before you get the job, it increases your chances in actually getting a job. Because if you're really good at writing or documenting or being organized, that shows. And that's a very attractive attribute for any engineer, especially because most engineers don't have that. So I want to take a moment and just share a couple things, simple tools or applications that I would recommend. And the first one that I would recommend is Notion. The dope thing about Notion is it's basically like Evernote or Microsoft OneNote, but better in that you can customize it and create the space the way you want it to be. This isn't an ad. This is just, I legit think Notion is pretty dope. And you can have course notes. You can have different kind of notebooks or spaces. You can have collaborative spaces, private spaces. And again, you can just throw all of your information, organize it the way you want, and let it grow over time. I actually started using it just a few months ago, but since then I've pretty much migrated all of my note taking from OneNote into Notion. And I just love how agile and easy it is to use. And most of these apps are like cloud-based, so you don't have to worry about locally saving. So that's not even something really to compare, but it does help when you're going from one device to another. And it's just really convenient when you have all of your notes just accessible and readily available. And the second tool I would recommend is Jira. Jira is a tool by Atlassian, which is really made to organize and track tasks. And they have the Kanban boards, they have list views. And the main reason to use Jira is to just be more organized when it comes to your team projects, to delegate and ensure ownership and centralizing all of the information. But it's also kind of an accountability check because you're able to say, hey, Jeff, you had this thing, but you didn't do it. Where's your contribution? I'm looking at the ticket, you didn't do it. And again, these are tools that are very common in the workplace. And if you get acclimated to them today, I guarantee when you get your job at a dope tech company, this will be a lot easier to say, oh, I'm familiar with these tools. I understand how they work. Let's go. Note taking may not seem glamorous, at least in the moment, but it has a delayed effect. When it's down the line and you've taken notes and you've documented what you've done, and then someone says, hey, how did you do that? Dope, you already have a note for that. Or they say, hey, how did you run this test? You have your test procedure and you can just say, reference this. Or someone's new and they're trying to get onboarded and you can just say, hey, check out this Confluence page with all of the documentation, or Notion page, and all of this documentation for you to kind of understand what we do, how we work, software we need, those kind of things, so I don't have to repeat myself every time somebody joins the team. And what I really like about documentation is it's dirty work that isn't really dirty, but it's stuff like this where if you do it when others don't, can't, or just won't, you actually put yourself in an advantage because you actually have all of the information and you're kind of centralizing and positioning yourself to be more aware because now the information flows through you. And yes, you can document it and organize it really well, but it also gives you the ability to learn more. And now people are going to lean towards you and say, hey, how did we do this project in the past? And since you were the person to write about that, or the person that was used as a funnel to get the documentation done, you may know more. And while you can point to it, you also wrote it. And that makes you most nearly indispensable. So take notes. Hopefully you guys found this useful. If you did, give me a thumbs up. I'd appreciate it. Comment below. What are some examples you think that documentation has helped you or that you can apply today? Is it maybe documenting your resume better? Because I think a lot of people still don't name their resume correctly, which should be first name, last name, resume.pdf. Pretty universal, pretty standard, easy to find for any and everybody. Another simple way could be writing lab reports, and make sure you document that clearly, not only for the actual class, but for your own personal records, because maybe that lab report is something that you use in your portfolio, that you use in your application when you're applying to your next tech role. So I'll see you guys on the next one. I appreciate you for watching all the way to the end, and have a dope day. Peace.